All right, we're going to reconvene our meeting and welcome Catherine Dimitrick from the VAPTA, Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Catherine Dimitrick. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission. We serve Franklin and Grand Isle counties, and I am the chair of the Regional Planning Commission Directors Group. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of follow-up to what Maura talked about. I'm going to take these housing needs that she talked about and translate it to Franklin and Grand Isle counties. We recently completed a housing needs analysis. And so I'm going to talk about what that means for Franklin and Grand Isle counties, which, as you know, are located just north of Chittenden County and are part of the Burlington Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is a data source, but it's also the reality of how our economy works. So we are very different from Chittenden County, but we are affected by and impacted by everything that happens in Chittenden County for good and for bad, mostly for bad. So in this past year, we recently completed a housing needs analysis. It was done by PlaceSense, which is a consulting firm in Vermont. And what it showed is that housing growth has actually happened in our region. But like Maura noted, the size of households are decreasing. So the number of households are growing faster than population. So if you have 5 people that move in, they need more houses than they did in the past. So housing growth also was not distributed across our region equally. So 2 of our towns, St. Albans Town and Fairfax, is where 45% of the new households were created over the past 20 years, which is really pretty remarkable of our entire region. 2 communities accounted for that. And in those 2 communities, Fairfax has water and sewer that's owned by the municipality. St. Albans Town has water and sewer available through an agreement with the city of St. Albans. I will note that we're not clear what the actual household growth is in St. Albans City, because at the time the census was conducted, they were in the midst of a major downtown reconstruction project, which tore down several buildings that were apartment buildings. And so they show as having a loss of housing units when in fact those were then rebuilt the following year. So we're interested in seeing what the new numbers will show for St. Albans City. So if you look at that later, that's not accurate. So our median age is rising in our counties, just like it is across the state. And our household size continues to decline. We're a little bit larger than other places in the state, but we still are a declining household size. So I'm just under 2.5 people per household. And then what's really striking about our data is the rise in non-family households. So if you look at the data in the year 2000, 72% of our households were family households. If you look at 2020, it's only 64% of our households. So our non-family and single person households have grown significantly, both in number and in proportion of our total household units. And that's important when you think about what you need for housing. Which leads me to my next slide. So if you look at our housing stock, our single unit, single family dwellings make up almost 80% of our housing stock in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. But as I noted before, our family households are down to 64%. So there's definitely already a mismatch in terms of what we have for housing and what we need for housing in terms of the household types and the houses that we have. Household income in our region is a real stark picture when you look at it. Renter and non-family households did not achieve the same income growth from the year 2000 to 2020 as our homeowners did. So if you look at all homeowners, which is the data on the left, if you were in Franklin County, you had a slight increase in income. If you were in Grand Isle County, there was a huge increase in income for all households. But then when you break that down and you look at the renters, which are on the far right, in Franklin County, renters only had a small income growth from 2000 to 2020. And in Grand Isle County, renters actually, their incomes went down. So if you look at Grand Isle County specifically, there is a huge disparity between homeowners and renters.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, and thank you. Renters, do you put renters and homeowners in an age category?
Renters and homeowners cover all of the age ranges, just like there's no specific group that, renters tend to be this age and homeowners tend to be this age.
I'm thinking that renters are probably a younger age group that.
Nope.
They're not?
No, it's.
I didn't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think our data did not show that, but there is definitely, there's no age is not a predictor of whether you own or rent, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good question. I thought of that in the previous presentation. So you did look at age.
Yeah, it's in my bigger study, but it's not in here. But I would say based on the data, while there may be some trends, it wouldn't be a predictor for a homeowner or a renter. So I want to talk about costs because we just talked about what happened to people's income. So this is a bit of a complicated slide, but it's not really once I explain it to you. So on the left-hand side, this shows the median sale price by town. The light green bar shows what the median price was in 2021. So if you look at the top one, North Hero, the median sale price in 2021 was $450,000. That green dark bar to the left, that's what the median sale price was in 2018. So that's how much the price of homes in North Hero, as an example, has gone up in 3 years. And so you can take that same approach and follow it down the list and see there are a couple of communities where there wasn't very much price change, but overall there was a pretty significant change in the median sale price from 2018 to 2021. And then rent is a similar approach with the green bar showing the cost in 2021 and the dark green line showing where it was in 2018.
Is that data based on home sales?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For the Department of Taxes, similar to it.
Yep.
And so then looking at that, let's think about what affordability is. So as you know, affordability, you've probably heard, if you spend no more than 30% of your income on your housing costs, you're considered to be in an affordable situation. So if you just think about your own circumstances, if you get paid 4 times a month, if a little more than one of those goes to cover your cost of housing, you get the other 3 paychecks to cover everything else. Well, if you look at what affordability looks like in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, we're finding that almost 1 in 3 households are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And for renters, 48% are living in unaffordable situations. And I want to really highlight renters because the chart that's on the right-hand side of the slide, the total is 48%. So you can see it comes just under 50% of renters are in unaffordable situations. But the breakdown of that, as shown by the green and the.
Sure, we're on the right slide.
Okay, affordability, did you miss one? Okay. All right, so we'll start again. So if you look at the renters column on the right hand of the slide, you see it comes to just under 48%. But if you look at so 48% of renters are living in places that aren't affordable. But if you look at how that's broken down, the green shows the percentage of renters that are paying between 30 and 50% of their income on housing. The blue shows that of that 48%, half of them are paying more than 50% of their income for housing. Now, just imagine if more than 2 of your paychecks went to cover housing, what that would do to your ability to afford the rest of your life. There's a lot here, but I'm going to explain this one too, because I thought it was an important visual to show, even though there's a lot to it. So we talked about how 1 in 3 households are living in an unaffordable situation. That is the upper left-hand circle that you see. 31% of our overall households are cost burdened. So the dark green wedge that you see is the percent that's cost burdened. Well, let's go across the top and see if we break down that a little bit more. If you are age 35 or younger, you asked about age, 41% are cost burdened. If you are not white, 54% are cost burdened. Now, what if we go down the left-hand side column and we look at people who are low income? So of people who are low income, 64% are cost burdened. That's the very middle circle on the far left-hand side. Now take that all the way over to non-white people who are low income. 83, yeah, 83% are cost burden. So 83% are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So you can see, if you go to the last bottom left-hand box, of middle income households, only 15% are cost burdened. It's everybody else that's having a disproportionate share of the cost burden when it comes to housing. So we're not trying to solve the problem of affordability for middle income Vermonters. We're trying to solve the issue of affordability for people who are low income, who are age 65 or older, who have a disability, and who aren't white. And this is who we're trying to solve this problem for, of affordability.
Can I ask just what the size of those circles means?
It's the proportion of total households that each one of those groups represent.
Thank you.
So it's kind of proportionally.
Thought you'd say that. Just wanted to be sure. Representative Logan.
Thank you.
Circles back to our earlier conversation. Could you let us know, please, how you're defining low income?
So 80% of median income. Thank you.
Representative Pat.
Also, in terms of income for the people who are living in unaffordable situation, does income include benefits, low income benefits that they may be receiving, or is that separate from that?
You know, I don't know the answer to the question off the top of my head. So I would need to find out the answer to that question for sure.
And do you know what your median income is?
I can look that up. I don't know. It's slightly below the state median income. I do know that. It's good with more about memorizing all these data points. She's my hero. So in total, when we did this work, we actually found that of the 23,000 households that exist in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, 7,600 have unmet housing needs. So that's defined as those who are currently unhoused, people who are underhoused. So we took a percentage of people who are in multi-generational households who assumed a percentage of those don't want to be there. And then it includes people who maybe need an accessible housing unit but don't have one. And there's a bunch of categories like that came to those who are underhoused. And then there are 6,600 cost burdened households. So in total, 7,600 households are in a situation that is not ideal, which is a really large percentage. It's about a third of our total, a little more than a third of our total households. So what are we doing about that? So we have two projects that we're working on. One is in partnership with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the Bylaw Modernization Program. We're working with 5 communities in our region to look at making sure their bylaws allow for the type of housing that we need in our region. And it was really interesting to be working on this project at the same time as H68 and S100, because everything that we were talking about that we're encouraging municipalities to do is included in these bills. And that's why I think we were really excited about participating in the conversations and supporting the bills. And you can see the recommendations to meet these needs are to focus on those experiencing the disproportionate impacts and to really focus on affordable housing units, especially in the missing middle. And H68 and S100 does that. They do that through the allowing duplexes everywhere. They do that through the higher density where water and sewer is. And the bills really look at encouraging and reducing barriers for this missing middle housing that we need, that the data has shown we really need. In terms of specific recommendations that we have on both H68 and S100, I know Charlie Baker is planning on coming in next week to go into some real specifics, but a couple of things I'll just highlight quickly, really early, is that there are a few things that aren't in the bills that we would like to recommend that be added. And one is to take H5, which is a bill that looks at regional land use plans and how they can be used to help guide state programs and permitting and incorporate pieces of that into the bills. And we also would like to recommend that the Australian ballot adoption of bylaws and plans that is an option in rural towns be stricken from statute and treat rural towns the same way urban towns are, so that the legislative body adopts the town plans and the bylaws. And then finally, we will have a couple of recommendations about the Act 250 portions, including potentially extending the 25.5 jurisdictional trigger to a buffer area around the designations. So not just the designation to the areas itself. And also, if we're having municipalities treat duplexes and single families homes the same, we think Act 250 should do the same. So when you're counting units for jurisdictional purposes for Act 250, a duplex should count as one instead of two. So those are a couple of things that we'll be talking about in more detail when Charlie comes back, but I just wanted to tee up for you.
So I guess that I have a question about your Baptist relationship to the planners EPA, who we heard from.
So separate, the Vermont Planners Association is made up of, there are some regional planners that participate in the Vermont Planners Association. I'm a member, but the regional planning commissions have a different set of priorities, probably from our different perspectives, I would say.
Okay, and so your recommendations are going to maybe not always line up.
They will not always line up. There are definitely some areas where we agree and some areas where we don't.
Representative Pat.
Just for what you just said, for the towns that have to vote by Australian ballot to adopt the town plan, is that because they're a small town, they don't have their own separate charter? And that other towns that for various reasons have their own charter, they included that provision, do you know?
You know, it's interesting. It isn't that.
Okay.
State statute actually treats urban municipalities different than rural municipalities, and they give urban municipalities the ability to have the legislative body adopt the bylaws, while rural municipalities, the voters can make a decision to.
So it'd be up to us
Yeah.
if we wanted to change it. Okay.
Yeah, and I've always found it really interesting that rural municipalities are held to a higher standard than urban municipalities in that regard. And one of the reasons why we think now is the time to address it is some of the great areas of municipal flexibility that were included in S100 and some in H68 require some affirmative action on the municipality in order to take advantage of those. And I've been involved in many cases where bylaws have been voted down, not because there's actually anything bad in the bylaws, but because one person with too much time on their hands convinces everybody that you're going to need a permit for your mailbox. And so everybody votes no. And it's just this strange, it's really a legislative function. It's not a voter function.
So how is how is rural and urban defined in the context that you're?
5,000 people.
Oh. I didn't know this.
And so we'll bring you specific language next week when Charlie comes in. We talked about it briefly. Yeah.
Do members have questions for the president? Yeah, Representative Bonner.
Well, when we talk on the last slide there about especially missing middle, and yet if you go up to the slide that shows all the circles, it kind of suggests there isn't a problem for middle. But I think you're talking about two different things on it.
Yeah, I think the middle, when you're talking about housing, is different than the middle when you're talking about income.
Okay, so what are you talking about when you talk about missing middle for housing?
For housing, you're talking about things like accessory dwelling units, like duplexes, like smaller homes on smaller lots that still have yards and porches. You're talking about condominiums. You're talking about things other than single family dwellings that cost $450,000. So you're talking about a flexibility of ownership and renter possibilities in smaller footprints, smaller sizes, sometimes common ownership, sometimes common walls.
Okay, so that's what you're talking about for the missing middle, but what are you talking, what does the term missing middle mean as you're using it here?
It's those sorts of houses.
No, but who's the?
Oh, who does it serve? So it's going to serve the people who are who are at or below the median income will be primarily who that serves. So it's going to serve the people who work as your para educators in your schools or who are check out your grocery.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. On the chart that you had up there with the circles,
Yeah.
you've got large percentages of non-white, the non-white community. Are you talking, when you're referring to non-white, you're referring to African Americans and Latinos?
Yeah, we're referring to Black, Indigenous, Asian, a mix of races. So the census allows you to pick more than one. Anything so if you didn't check the white only category on the census, it refers to all of the
Do
other.
you know what the populations are of Franklin County and Grand Isle County?
We're about 50,000 altogether.
15,000?
50.
50,000,
Yeah.
non-white.
No. Oh, you mean total non-white, the actual total number?
Yeah.
I don't know that total number off the top of my head. I do know it's growing. And I will tell you that the increase in people who chose Black, Indigenous, Asian, or more than one race in this census, the increase in that number was almost 100% of the population increase.
Oh,
So that was
I
interesting.
guess going a little further, and Kate, you can probably help because I know you've been involved in a lot of this, but are these families that have just recently moved, or have they been here for 50 years or 60 years, or does a census tell you that?
It does tell you that in some of the measures, but I would say that that's usually done through the American Community Survey, which is more of an estimate. And our population numbers are such that most of those are inaccurate.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Further questions? Representative
I
Bongard.
guess just one, maybe your answer will have to be a little bit anecdotal, but going back again to the circles. Like on the bottom left hand, or when it kind of shows middle income, only 15% cost burden. Is it also the case that people who might be in that category still can't find a place to live?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So those are people who are there now, not necessarily those who like a child coming back.
Yeah. I'm in that category, right? So I'll raise my hand, yes, because I'm in a home now that's going to be too big for me next year because I'll have an empty nest, but I'm staying. I can afford my home and I'm staying because I can't afford to move anywhere else. So the housing that I have is not going to meet my needs, but I'm staying.
Or it's going to overmeet your need.
It will overmeet my needs. Yeah. And also it also includes seniors who may want to downsize or move to a different place or allow their children to move into their home while they go somewhere else. And it's really the lack of affordability is clogging up the home market. Even if you can afford where you are right now, it may not be where you want to be. And I had just to add to the anecdotes, after we released our housing study, we got a lot of calls from reporters, and I had this great conversation with a person who had moved here, was in their 20s and renting, had moved here from Maine to take a journalist job. And everything I was talking to this person about, they said, yeah. And then they ended by telling me that they were a renter because they couldn't afford to buy anything here and plan to fully make their career here in Vermont, and ended up by saying, it's almost like Vermont doesn't want me.
May I add to that?
Representative Smith.
Thank you. If a person can afford $1,000 a month rent or $1,100 or whatever it is, and they have $4,000 or $5,000 in their pocket, and they've got good credit, what's stopping them from buying a piece of property?
I don't buy them a piece of property and then
Buying a home.
buying a home, because $1,000 isn't going to get you a home. If the median household price is $300,000, $1,000 a month isn't going to get you a home.
Could finance for 200 years, it would take.
You could, yeah. If interest rates were still super low and you could finance for
Yeah.
60 years instead of 30, it could get you a home. And also remember that at least in our region, and I think more showed statewide, half of the people that are spending $1,000 on their rent can't afford that $1,000. And so they couldn't get a mortgage that had an equivalent payment.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Thanks for having me in.
It's an interesting testimony this afternoon.
Yes, very. Right, so we have.
The good news is you have two bills to look at that are going to really do something. They're going to solve everything, but they're going to do something.
So we're going to hear from Chris and Jacob tomorrow. So thank you both for your flexibility. See you at the same time tomorrow.
Thanks.
And right now we're going to shift gears and invite Joyce Manchester to join us. Shifting gears to back to S5 and S5.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thanks very much. Do you prefer that I run through the fiscal note on the screen, share it on the screen, or do people want to look at it on iPads?
We have it up on the webpage, so I think that's fine. If we can just, you walk us through it. Oh, well, hold on a second. Make sure it's up there. You do? Coming up for me. Okay.
For viewers, it's sometimes easier. Only 3 pages.
That's true.
Yeah, there it is.
I realized that it wasn't coming up.
Okay.
Hit refresh. So, yeah, I think it's fine. It's small font. It's fine for us to walk through it on our individual devices.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I'm Joyce Manchester from the Joint Fiscal Office. I have been working on the Affordable Heat Act for a few years, although I must say this year I have spent less time on the Affordable Heat Act, or Clean Heat Act, as it used to be called. I've been spending more time on the child care bill and the paid family leave bill. But in any event, here we are. And back in mid-March, I did put together this fiscal note on the current version of S5. And the thing to realize about the bill is that it's very much focused on the next fiscal year. So the fiscal impact is limited because basically the PUC and the Public Service Department are gearing up to be able to eventually implement the Affordable Heat Act. So the fiscal impact is, how shall I say this? Not huge in the coming year. It's basically administrative costs, hiring some people and getting some studies underway and so forth. That does not mean to say that this would be the ongoing fiscal impact. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I think you've done a walkthrough of the bill with Ellen, so you sort of understand what's going on, I hope. We always include a very short a very short bill summary in our fiscal notes. And so I'll start off with that. So the bill would establish the clean heat standard to reduce Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions from the thermal, what I think of as the heating sector, also the cooling sector. The Public Utility Commission would administer the clean heat standard with assistance from 2 advisory groups, the Technical Advisory Group, or TAG as they call it, and the Equity Advisory Group. The Department of Public Service would be a partner in providing assistance and in verifying and evaluating the clean heat credit claims. So that's what the bill is trying to do. It's trying to set up those 2 departments, the PUC, I shouldn't say departments. It's trying to set up the PUC and the Department of Public Service to be able to implement the clean heat standard. So the fiscal impact, JFO estimates that the bill would have a $1.725 million fiscal impact on the general fund. So this is all general fund spending in fiscal year 2024. And here I say, as a hint, the fiscal impact of the bill would likely be greater in future years because of increased investments over time. So the two appropriations from the general fund for the coming fiscal year, FY24, would be $825,000 for the Public Utility Commission to pay for 3 new full-time positions, consultants, per diems for the 2 advisory group members, marketing and public outreach and translation services, and $900,000 for the Department of Public Service to pay for 3 new positions, consultants, and funding to complete the potential study and economic modeling. And many people think that that potential study with economic modeling is really important to be able to understand what we need to do as a state going forward. Okay, and now I no longer need to say that this appropriation reflects a recent request from the Department of Public Service. We were very slow in getting their appropriation request. So there were some other numbers floating around until the day that this fiscal note was released. So that's why that sentence is in there. So that's the basic outline, and we can go through this in more detail, or you can start asking questions either way. Do you have a preference?
More detail would be good.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to run through this background on the clean heat standard, and if there are questions along the way, I will try to answer them. This is supposed to be a bit more detail, but not super in-depth on what the clean heat standard is trying to do. So first off, there are obligated parties, and these obligated parties include the regulated natural gas utilities that serve customers in Vermont. Also, entities that import other heating fuels for consumption within Vermont, and also entities that produce, refine, manufacture, or compound other heating fuels within Vermont for consumption in Vermont. So anybody who brings energy into the state would be subject to these clean heat credits. And those clean heat credits are assigned by the commission, by the PUC, based on the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. They'll be ramping up more and more clean heat credits over time in order to get us to the greenhouse gas reductions that we need.
Are you reading from page 1 of this?
I'm still at the very bottom of page 1. I'm reading the obligated parties are down in a footnote.
Oh,
If you're looking for that.
I'm looking for what you're reading. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I have it up. I just, geez.
Right. The question is, do you interrupt the flow with all the detail, or do you stick it in a footnote? Exactly. Okay. And what exactly are the clean heat credits? Well, they are a tradable, non-tangible commodity that represents the amount of greenhouse gas emission reductions caused by a clean heat measure. Okay. So you can think of installing a heat pump as being worth a certain number of clean heat credits. Or you can think of weatherizing a home as being worth a certain number of clean heat credits. So the folks who are importing oil to be burned in homes will be assigned a certain number of clean heat credits that they have to retire. In other words, they have to weatherize a certain number of homes or install a certain number of heat pumps, or they have to pay somebody else to do those things, weatherize homes or install heat pumps, install hot water heat pumps, and so on. So that's the basic gist. Okay, so I just told you that the PUC is the group that would establish the number of clean heat credits that obligated parties must retire each year. Okay, I think we're good. All right, now we can go into the sections of the bill to see exactly where the fiscal impacts occur. So in section 3, we have the clean heat standard that gets defined and established, and the clean heat credit system. So credits are based on life cycle greenhouse gas emission reductions that result from the delivery of eligible clean heat measures to end use customers in Vermont. So that's what I was saying. If you install a heat pump, if you weatherize a home, if you convert somebody from a oil burning stove to a pellet stove, that sort of thing. All those are worth a certain amount of clean heat credits. And the rules for those credits will be established by the PUC. based on these contracts that they will undertake, given the financing in this bill. Okay. Yes, the PUC will adopt rules to implement and enforce the Clean Heat Standard Program, including establishing the number of credits. Right. I've seen that before. Okay. So making annual requirements understandable to the public will include using translation services. And this is a last minute addition as well. So we have money in the bill to take care of those translation services. It is a requirement in the bill that each obligated party will retire at least 16% of their assigned credits from customers with low income and another 16% from customers with moderate.
I'm so sorry.
Get the paddles out again.
My goodness.
Which paddle?
I'll just leave.
Heart attack here.
That was a wake up message.
It does feel like it, right? It worked that way.
Yeah, I think you planned that. It's good.
Yeah.
Hence the request for paddles.
Okay, so we have 32% of their credits going to low and moderate incomes, and half of that 32% of the credits must go to capital investments that will last at least 10 years and lower energy bills. So this is all in S5. And then we have the Department of Public Service, whose job it is to verify and evaluate the clean heat credit claims. Okay, so entities will submit their clean heat credits to DPS. DPS will then take a look and make sure that they will result in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And the PUC may hire a consultant to evaluate, develop, or support a means for tracking clean heat credits and compliance. Okay, I'll keep going if there are no questions. Section 3 also establishes those two advisory groups to help the PUC. So we have the technical advisory group and the equity advisory group. As you would expect, the technical advisory group establishes and revises the methodology used to determine each obligated party's annual requirement and establish credit values for each year of an installed clean heat measure's expected life. The TAG, the technical advisory group, will provide feedback on the work of the consultant hired by the commission to develop assumptions and methods relevant to clean heat measures and life cycle emissions analyses. And the way the per diems work is that you get a per diem if you're not otherwise paid by your employer. So state employees who might be on this technical advisory group would not get extra payments. Anybody whose employer reimburses them for time spent in government service would not receive the per diem. Other folks would. And then we have the equity advisory group to assist the commission in ensuring that an equitable share of clean heat measures is delivered to Vermonters with low and moderate income. And that Vermonters who are not early participants in clean heat measures are not negatively impacted in their ability to afford heating fuel. I think the second part of that is going to be very challenging because you can expect that the price of oil and traditional fossil fuel energy sources, those prices are going to rise as the price of these clean heat credits goes up, right? Because the importer of oil, let's say, will have to pay higher and higher prices to get somebody to install more and more and more heat pumps, let's say, or weatherize more homes or whatever. And they're going to pass that higher price of clean heat credits along to their customers, presumably, in order to be able to pay them. So you can think that that's an increase in the price of fossil fuels over time, and how to protect the low and moderate income folks who have not yet made the switch to energy efficient methods of heating and cooling will be a challenge.
Representative Smith.
Or are unable to make the switch financially.
So, yes. But let's see, the folks who are assigned the clean heat credits must find a way to use 16% of them on low-income folks, which means they are going to make it worthwhile for the low-income folks to install the heat pumps or weatherize or whatever, right? So they may have to take a lower price, not the market price for that job. Right?
How can they keep surviving
So
if they don't make the money that they need to make to keep their business operating?
So it's the entire business you need to think about. If they're not making money on installing the heat pumps for those low-income folks, they'll either raise the prices on heat pumps for the folks who can pay full price, or they'll raise the price of their oil deliveries, right? I mean,
Right.
somehow they're going to make their business whole or go out of business, right?
Thank you.
Yes, the market will work, we think, we hope, we expect. Okay, and yes, we have per diems and expenses, right? Okay, we'll move on to section 6. This concerns how the commission will implement the clean heat standard. Commission will hire a facilitator to help with public engagement, advertise at least 6 public hearings or workshops, and provide at least 3 opportunities for the submission of written comments. The section also requires that the commission deliver several reports to the General Assembly or committees of jurisdiction. And there's a note later on in the fiscal note that says it will be very important for those committees, that means you, and the General Assembly to pay attention to the reports, because that will tell you how well the system is working. Is it really reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And is it doing so without having a negative effect or severely negative effects on certain segments of the population? That will be really important. Okay, section 7 establishes 3 new positions in the PUC and 2 new positions in the Department of Public Service. It appropriates $1.725 million from the general fund, which is what we talked about before. Okay, now my job at JFO is to tell you more about the appropriations. So $825,000 from the general fund is going to the PUC, 3 new positions, any consultants, and the marketing public outreach. And you can see that in table 1, where we have the nice JFO colors, green, blue. Are there any questions about those? I think it's pretty clear in the table. The $900,000 appropriation to the Department of Public Service covers 3 new positions, consultants to support verification and evaluation, and funding for the potential study and economic modeling. And here I would note that the $250,000 for the potential study and economic modeling would be for the first year only. So we don't expect that to continue beyond the first year. The positions, the consultants, most of the spending up in table 1, those are expected to continue. And all that funding comes from the general fund. Good. Okay, so now we move on to the impact on Vermont's economy. And here JFO is relying on the pathways analysis report that was completed for the Vermont Climate Council as part of their work. And their estimate was that reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont, in line with the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements, would offer $6.4 billion in net benefits by 2050 compared to business as usual. Now, some people say, well, business as usual has changed relative to when this report was done. And that is true. There's more federal funding. I think Sarah Clark talked to you today sometime about the various provisions that would impact the thermal sector. Business as usual has changed. And so the $6.4 billion might differ a little bit. I don't think it's going to differ a heck of a lot. Okay. But the clean heat standard is important in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal sector, one of the largest sectors for emitting greenhouse gases. So, and then I say, although additional costs and investments will be required to reduce emissions as required in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the avoided costs for fossil fuels together with the avoided economic, health, and environmental damages are expected to yield net significant benefits by 2050. Okay, so that's to say, yes, we have to invest a lot of money in order to get where we need to be. But if we invest that money, the net benefits will be positive. Based on the best thinking out there, not JFO's thinking. JFO has no thinking on that subject, let me just say that. Okay. So here is the paragraph, the final paragraph, where it says, it will be important to monitor how the clean heat standard is implemented and administered, and how the state can ameliorate possible negative effects on households and businesses, with special attention to households with low and moderate incomes. Okay, so this is a little reminder that it's not going to be perfectly smooth sailing out there. There will have to be some adjustments along the way to make sure that low and moderate income households and businesses are not negatively affected more than they need to be. And then I talk about the critical roles that various players will have as the scenario plays out. That includes the Public Utility Commission, the Department of Public Service, wholesale fuel dealers and natural gas utilities, and the households and businesses that will be forced to choose how to heat and cool their homes and businesses as we go forward. So it's going to take a lot of people saying, yes, I want heat pumps. Yes, I want weatherization, so forth and so on. More and more and more people as time goes on in order to get to where we need to be. And then here's the sentence for you. The General Assembly will have an important oversight role in monitoring implementation and reviewing and responding to the frequent reports and recommendations from the Commission. So that's the fiscal note.
Okay, do members have questions? Representative Pat.
The long-term fiscal net benefit that you mentioned, if that was based on the data from 2 years ago, I think you said, how much of that is based on the cost of the avoided cost of fuel, because fuel has gone up $1 or $2 a gallon?
Yes, but that's a long-term look at expectations of what fuel prices will be.
Okay.
And so 2 years ago, they were still expected to go up.
Okay.
They might have gone up really fast in the near term, but I would expect that the long-term path is not terribly different from what it was.
Representative Baumgart.
The 6.4 billion,
Mm-hmm.
that adheres to the entirety of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Absolutely, yes.
And do we have a number for just this section?
I do not. Yeah, I do not. So I don't even know if that would be possible to break out.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks. All right, members, that completes our work for the day. We will start.